What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Motorfest. So I did recently have a pretty decent idea. I also want to run this by you guys to see what your thoughts are on this. What if Motorfest actually had platinum part sets? Now I'm going to get into more details of how this could actually work in the future, but we obviously do know the game does currently have like a nitro chemist or even like a loot digger, and they're obviously going to be full gold sets with like different affixes stat builds on them. And I would say a lot of people are most likely wondering how an actual platinum part set would work. Now we do know back in the Crew 1 there's obviously like platinum part sets back then, but of course that game was from 2014, so we didn't have like crazy affixed stat builds with them. And of course you could like re-roll different builds, so you basically had that said platinum part on it, and then that would then make like the car basically max leveled. And then of course you can move the parts around, so there wasn't anything insanely special there. And then fast forwarding to the Crew 2, we obviously had the full gold part sets, and that way you can go around to like different affixed stat builds and stuff like that. So it was obviously a big jump into that. Now, the big question is though, if we were to have something like that in Motorfest, how would it actually work? Not only is that going to be a question, but one thing I can't help but ask too is if they actually did add the platinum parts into this game, is that going to make the grinding that much worse, but also are they going to be worth going after? We obviously do know, guys, going after gold sets in this game is obviously a challenge in itself, so having an additional part set to actually grind for is probably not going to be the most exciting thing for most players, including myself, because you most likely spend hours on end to get the other ones. And if you guys were like me and you spent around 10 to 12 hours to get a said Nitro Chemist set done, you are most likely not going to want to grind for a platinum set. Now, one way they could probably do this though is to maybe have one platinum set per category, and I guess they could have something special about each one. Like, I don't know if every single part can maybe have a different piece of like every other part in it. For example, guys, maybe that said platinum set is going to be a mix of everything. Like, maybe you can have like a sniffer set on one side and then like maybe a bucks and XP magnet. Even have a special scorebreaker set in the middle. Now, the funny part of this, though, is the more that I actually talk about this idea, the more that I do feel like it's probably a bit insane, and I would say it is most likely not going to work having a different random part on every single said part in that category, and you would most likely not want to run that if you were driving around or even like doing an event. So the other idea I had, though, guys, is what if they actually had the platinum part sets come with like a special affixes stat on them, similar to something like you would see in like a summit. So for example, let's say you are grinding out those parts and maybe they could drop a loot digger. Maybe those said platinum part sets could have like an additional advantage to them. Maybe instead of being like a 25.5 on like lucky, maybe it's going to be like a 27.5 or something like that, or even like a 28. So that way it's going to be slightly higher than like the original. Now I would say, guys, in the future we are most likely going to see upgraded part fuck. Now, I would say that we are most likely going to see upgraded gold part sets in the future, especially coming out in summits, similar to how like they were in the Crew 2 before. So, in a way, I would say this is obviously not going to be a great design, because there's really no point of actually upgrading the set of fixed stats on the actual platinum, if there were platinum parts for that matter, in the game if you are actually going to get an upgraded gold part anyway. So having the affixed stats raised a bit on a platinum part is most likely not going to work. And I would say that overall design is probably going to be flawed from like the beginning. Now, one way they can also design this, I feel like I'm finally getting a bit of insight, and I'm obviously going to be unblocked. That was probably a terrible joke. But nonetheless though, guys, I would say one way they can also do this. So for example, the buck set in the game is obviously a 15%. Of course, if you are running all 7 of those, which I do have to admit, by the way, only being a 15% boost on bucks was honestly a bit disappointing, but I guess it is better than like a 5% booster, because that would almost be borderline not even worth running. Now, I would say though, guys, what if a platinum set, instead of being a 15% like the gold ones, what if it was maybe like a 20 or even like a 25%? I would say that actually might be a bit better and even worth running that way. And of course, that set would obviously come with like the base, like actual affixed stats on them, and you could obviously re-roll them afterwards, or who knows, maybe the re-rolling doesn't work on the platinum parts, and those parts only have a big advantage to the said multiplier of it. Now, I would say though, only having this for a few of the part sets is probably the best way to do it. So the platinum part set would most likely only work on certain sets in the game, for example like a bucks magnet, or even something like one of the other ones like an XP magnet as well. And I would say maybe the last one they could probably do it on is maybe a loot digger. But then again, guys, I feel like a lot of players are not going to want to grind for an extra set of part sets they don't even need, or most likely will not even use if they actually do level up the affixed stats on these in the game right now, which I would say in the future in the summits we will definitely end up seeing that. So I really do think having a full platinum part set in this game is probably not going to be a thing. And the main reason why I say that though is I do feel like instead of adding different platinum part sets, they could most likely just add upgraded gold ones, because there is most likely not going to be an entirely new update based on platinum parts. That would most likely not end up working out that great because nobody is actually going to want to grind 4 extra parts in this game, which I would say, guys, is probably going to be one of the biggest factors, which honestly I can also agree with. But one way they might be able to actually do this is probably going to be to only get the platinum parts after the gold ones. But as I did mention earlier, I do hate to say this, but they would most likely only do certain parts sets like the Bucks one, even something like an XP magnet, that way people don't like exploit it. Like having a platinum nitrochemist set is most likely going to be better than a gold one, even if it's just slightly, so that obviously could make a big difference with like cheating in a summit or like even in PvP for that matter. So I do understand how that is an issue. Now, if they did actually do this, guys, I really do think a Bucks or even like an XP is probably the best route. That way you can only use that extra set to actually get more money and XP that way. But I would like to know what you guys think about this in the comments below. Like, do you think something like this would actually work? Now, I would say maybe one way they could actually do this is to only get the platinum part after the said gold set is done. So, for example, guys, you cannot actually get a full platinum part set without having a gold one. That would actually be a decent way to mix up the RNG. That way, the only way to get a platinum part to drop is to have a gold set done. And I would say that would most likely help with like the actual RNG. Like, can you guys imagine having green, blue, pink slash purple, and also gold? And then, of course, throwing in a platinum part in there, that might honestly be insane. But having that said platinum part as like an upgraded version of the gold one is probably going to be one of the best ways to have the RNG not freak out. But let's be honest, guys, a lot of people are most likely not going to want to grind for an additional part set that might end up having maybe a 5 or even like a 10% booster extra to it. So I guess there's probably going to be a lot of insane things we might end up seeing in Motorfest in the future. But do let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. I do feel like an insane update like this may happen, where we may end up seeing like a different part set being added, or like, who knows, maybe like an upgraded version of the gold sets that are already in here. I guess time is only going to tell what we're going to see in this game.